I'm going live, firing up Restream. Let's check on YouTube to see if we're rolling. Today, it didn't update my, the name of my stream? I don't know. Let's load it up and see what happens. Oh, it did. Trump disqualified. That's what I named this stream. It's the end of the day. It's almost 5:30. I was in court this morning remotely right here. And then I set a case for trial. It's set for trial on June 23rd, 2025. So if you're in the Orange County Superior Court in California and you go to your first case management conference and they say, well, when's the first trial date do you got? And they say, well, it's June 23rd, 2025, 18 months from now. You go, okay, Judge, I'll take that. The insurance attorney is just thinking to themselves, oh, I don't have to pay for another year and a half. I can bill on this file all that time. And that's what happens in the court of justice. Okay, the wheels of justice grind slowly. Now, I set a trial in Riverside County earlier this week for August 9th. That's a Friday. It starts on a Friday. You do a mandatory mediation before you turn your exhibits into the judge. And that got set within 6 months? So different courtrooms have different times, different time limits on how long you're going to take, how much time they have to give you a jury trial. And the jury trial generally represents the outer bounds of when your client's going to get paid. Because when certain defendants decide that they're not going to pay, they usually wait. Oh. Hope that wasn't doing interference. When they usually wait until they're actually forced to pay. And if they can continue to postpone the jury trial, then they'll continue to try to do that. But with Trump and the ballot, that is kind of time sensitive because the ballots have to be prepared and Trump has to be either put on the ballot or not on the ballot. So the Supreme Court took up this case right away. And we are here today looking at the oral argument on the Trump versus Anderson case, which is the Colorado case that the Supreme Court of Colorado had a 5-day evidentiary hearing of some sort. I didn't watch it. And there were witnesses and there was evidence that was submitted. And ultimately, a majority of the justices on the Colorado Supreme Court decided that Trump was disqualified for participation in an insurrection. Was January 6th an insurrection? I mean, it looked kind of like an insurrection to me. People went into the White House, or not the White House, the Congress, and they, the Capitol, and they went in there and they disrupted the peaceful transfer of power. At least they delayed it a few hours. Now, there's another layer of that, is that did Trump incite that insurrection or did he participate in it? Because I think go to the 14th Amendment and we can look at the actual shall have engaged in insurrection. So the Section 3 says that that the senator, the representative, the elector of president, vice president, or any office holder, well, basically you had to have taken an oath as a member of Congress and then shall have engaged in insurrection, then you can't hold any office, civil or military, under the United States. So did Trump engage in insurrection? Was it an insurrection? No one's been charged with insurrection. Did Trump engage in an insurrection? Well, that's arguable. Maybe he was engaged in it, or maybe he wasn't engaged in it. The Colorado Supreme Court found that he engaged in insurrection. And that's what the Supreme Court was hearing oral arguments on today. The majority of the court is conservative or Republican appointed justices. So it'll be interesting if it falls down on party appointed lines. Will the justices rule based upon their political affiliation, or will they rule based upon what they think the law is? And if it's a unanimous, how do I start a class action lawsuit? Well, you got to file a class action lawsuit. So if you have, there's a little delay here on that chat screen. Let me see if I can go over here. Well, you check the box for class action. So when you file a lawsuit, there's usually a box that you check for class action in the appropriate county, and then you pay probably has a different filing fee than a regular case, and you got to look at the civil case cover sheet, and you have to check that box, and then you get a filing for a class action. You want the payout. Well, was there already a class action? Well, look, when you do a class action, then you got to split the money up among all of the different people. So, like, let's say you have a class and you think it's worthwhile. You become the class representative. You have to do all the work. You have to represent the whole class of people. And then at the end of it, the judge divides up whatever settlement you can get from the defendants. So if you just want the payout, it might not be worth it. I want the most. I want 10%. I've done multi-plaintiff actions. In other words, millions of products are affected. Usually the class representative does get more money for being the class representative. They get some of the money. I've never done a class action. I've filed them, but all my experience has been just in individual actions or in what we call mass tort actions, which is basically I represent multi-plaintiff cases. There's a lot of plaintiffs. They all have similar claims, but their damages are different. For example, I represented about 400 people in the Route 91 Vegas shooting, where Stephen Paddock shot from Mandalay Bay, an MGM property, and murdered like 58 people and maimed a whole bunch more people and caused a lot of people a lot of emotional distress. That was not a class action. That was a multi-plaintiff action. So everybody's got their own lawsuit. You have emails, millions of products. What's the product? I came in on here to discuss the insurrection. Now we're discussing. But I'm happy. Well, you're not sane. Okay, well, you don't want to let the cat out of the bag. There's all kinds of class action lawsuits. I mean, if there's a product, oftentimes if there's a product that is defective, for example, I just got a call from a lady who had a nasal procedure done, some type of nasal procedure from some drug company that put out this product. And that's each case is an individual case because the damages are different and how they came into contact with the product might be different. So every case is kind of its own case. It's known as a multi-plaintiff case. It's not necessarily a class action. So you got to probably have a lawyer to do a class action. But anyway, if you want to do a class action against Donald Trump, the Supreme Court is considering whether he can be discarded, whether he can be removed from the ballot by an individual state. I don't know if he can. I'm not a constitutional law professor. I'm not a Supreme Court justice. I got A's in constitutional law in law school, procedural and substantive. I think I know a thing or two about it. Okay, but I'm not an expert. Certainly the provision of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment hasn't been litigated very often. So whether or not someone has engaged in an insurrection, can they file the same thing if I consult a lawyer? Same product? Well, you consult with an attorney. There's different attorneys that do products. Like, for example, one of the big firms across the United States is Morgan and Morgan. That's a big one. So you can call Morgan and Morgan. Morgan and Morgan. They're like across the whole United States. They're the big firm, America's largest injury law firm. Verdicts and settlements. This is like some ad. Can I get to the main website? Here's the guy.
Have you been injured?
I'm John Morgan of
Morgan and Morgan.
There he is. He's got all these his websites are so well siloed off. Does he do class actions? Here he goes. Class actions. Morgan and Morgan. Tenant health security breach, Apple Watch screen defect, First American data breach lawsuit, Zoom to Facebook data sharing lawsuit. Look, he's got a bunch of them that he's involved in collecting. Look, go to that page right there. I don't know. Morgan and Morgan is like my competitor in a way because they take individual personal injury cases and I'm like a little guy. But man, they're pretty big. So I would go there. If you really think a product has caused you injury and you really want to consult with someone, I would go ahead and contact Morgan and Morgan. I don't know what state you're in, but they're in like, I think most states. Yeah, like if you're in any of these states, you can see Alaska, Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, California. Do they have every state on there? Maybe? No, I don't think so. I can't see down that list. But they have a lot of states, and they might know where to refer you if you don't want to say what product it is to me. And if you have emails, that would probably be even better. But getting back to my original discussion for today, the 14th Amendment, Section 3, it seems to me that during Reconstruction, after the Civil War, when the 14th Amendment was passed, there were states that were being run by Confederate people. They had been in Congress. They had been in judgeships. Yeah, you're welcome. Morgan and Morgan, they're big. They had been electors of presidents and vice presidents, and they had been insurrectionists. They had joined the Confederacy. And Congress didn't want them coming up and causing problems in Congress or whatever. So they passed this Section 3. And they said, hey, if you've engaged in an insurrection or rebellion or given aid to someone or comfort to the enemies thereof, I don't know what the hell that means, but anyway, just take it at its plain meaning. The enemy of the United States would, I guess, be an insurrectionist. Then you can't be the president, or you can't at least be a senator. You can't be a representative. You can't be in Congress. You can't be elected as president or vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States. So there's kind of two main questions here. Did Donald Trump engage in an insurrection? Colorado court said he did after a 5-day hearing. Who decides? Is it a state issue or is it a federal issue? And then the third question is the president in office of the United States or under the United States? Is the catch-all provision applicable to the president of the United States? That's never been tested. In other words, I'm not aware that any president prior to Donald Trump has faced a challenge under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So there were oral arguments today. It's not inquiry. Wait, what is he saying? I'm I'm looking at the wrong screen here to determine. Okay. There were oral arguments today. I didn't get to watch all the oral arguments. I wanted to listen to them, but because I had discovery responses deadline today and because I had court today, I was like, dang, I'm not going to get to listen to all of the oral arguments. I'm not going to get to listen to the justices grill these attorneys who have been sitting locked up somewhere in a hotel room practicing what they're going to say to get their point across. But my 2 cents is that the 14th Amendment was passed during Reconstruction after the Civil War, and its primary purpose, at least Section 3 appears to be, is to keep people from the southern states, elected officials who'd taken an oath and who had engaged in insurrection or rebellion during the Civil War, that those people were going to be barred from holding federal office, civil or military, or senators or representatives or elector positions to elect the same. And that makes a lot of sense because you don't want them up there meddling around and doing stuff that's contrary to the North's desires. But then who has the power to decide this section? Is it a state, Secretary of State, or Supreme Court, depending on normally the electors who's elected in a state is up, and who gets on the ballot is up to the state. But for this particular provision, what good would it be if, for example, Louisiana was the state of Louisiana was the authority to decide who was an insurrectionist in the Civil War? What if Alabama state court or the state court of South Carolina or West Virginia, these are all states that were part of the Confederacy. After the Civil War, is it the state that decides who is an insurrectionist and who is not an insurrectionist? Or is it the federal government? Now, the point and purpose of the section is to stop insurrectionists and those who have engaged in insurrection or rebellion from holding office. So if the state is in charge of deciding that question of who has engaged in insurrection or rebellion, then what good is the amendment? What good is the section? Then the state of Louisiana is the one that decides that question. Okay, so that's my main problem with the states making the decision on who is ineligible under Section 3, is that if they are the ones who decide, then really we would have just had Louisiana and South Carolina and West Virginia and all the other southern states, Alabama, Georgia, all the insurrectionist states deciding who was an insurrectionist. And they could all just say, well, we're not insurrectionists. We're coming up and we decide. We're voting no, we're not. So it seems to me that the due process required to a candidate for presidency under Section 3 requires more than just the state decision. In other words, the entity that applies the disability to the person shouldn't be the entity that the amendment was trying to take power away from. Now, prior to the 14th Amendment, there is a federal statute that basically says any insurrectionist is barred from holding office. So my belief is that the amount of due process that's required is a criminal trial. That proof beyond a reasonable doubt has to be established that the person's an insurrectionist. Well, then people say, well, a lot of former Confederates were never held to that standard, and they were barred from holding office. Well, that's a good point. So I don't know. Then the other question is since it doesn't list president in here, it just says civil or military. I mean, technically the president is a civil office holder, but he's like not just an appointed office holder. Okay, he is the president. He's the commander in chief. It's a civil office. Technically, it's an office, but he's not like a military officer or like a civil servant. He's more of like the president. And that would mean that he wouldn't be required to submit to this section. So there's the other argument that I think makes a good point. And I think this is the most powerful section, is Section 5, that Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article, not the states, not the individual states. They don't have the power. It doesn't say the Supreme Court of Colorado has the power to enforce the provisions of this article through its judiciary power. It's the legislation. So, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. And that kind of cuts back against, well, if Congress is the one that makes the legislation and then someone's convicted of a criminal statute or even some other statute, some other law that that the person's been found to have violated, insurrection or a rebellion, then Congress could say, whoa. Yeah, technically the person was convicted, but we're going to remove the disability because since we have the power to pass the legislation by 1/2 of the House, just by a majority, we got the legislation through. But now we're saying we want to remove that disability. They must have had somebody particularly in mind. There was a group of people that they thought that might try to run for office that had some authority still that they might want to remove the disability for. Or maybe they just threw it in there just to make it impossible for anybody to ever get the disability removed once it was placed upon them. But that would make federal legislation the operative power, and the amount of due process would probably be a criminal trial. And that's what I think the judges are going to rule. I think they're going to probably state unanimously that that this is a federal power. This is not a state power, despite the fact that many disabilities are placed on, like, for example, under Article here it is, Article 2. They are civil officers, see? And all civil officers, they list them out separately under the impeachment clause section in Article 2 for the president and the vice president and all civil officers. So there's a question of whether or not the president's actually a civil officer, because why wouldn't you just say all civil officers of the United States if the president was naturally part of the civil officers? So that's a question. I think the judges might rule on it that way. But under Article 2 in the executive power, and I believe that's the age requirement. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5. No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution shall be eligible. And they must also be 30. They must have attained the age of 35. And have been 14 years a resident within the United States. So you can't just come into the United States and become the president of the United States. So, yeah, I think the Supreme Court's going to say, yeah, Trump can't be disqualified from because the state doesn't have this power, because it wasn't meant for the states, because if it was meant for the states, then the states would have been able to use it to send insurrectionists to Congress. It's enacted. It's in those who have standing might be the states, but they have to do so. The finding and due process for finding that someone is an insurrectionist lies in the federal statutes and the federal basic prosecution. And then the disability can be removed by 2/3 of Congress in the event that someone is an insurrectionist and has been convicted of that. And that maybe might even go as far as to say the president is not subject to the disability under the 14th Amendment, Section 3, because the president and the vice president are not civil officers. They hold a higher, different office that's separately discussed in other areas of the Constitution. So there's not only are they not subject to Section 3, but to be subject to Section 3, you have to have a conviction, because the legislature of the United States, the federal government, has the power, shall have the power to enforce Section 3 with appropriate legislation. So not only would he need the due process of the federal insurrection statute, not just some due process that Colorado or Maine Secretary of State decides to give him, but it wouldn't even be applicable to the president. So I think that maybe there might be a plurality, there might be some differing opinions among the justices over exactly why Trump has to be on the ballot and can't be disqualified, but I think that it will probably be a unanimous decision. Just to clarify things going forward, I did listen to some of the oral argument, and I think several of the justices brought up, well, what's the implication of this? If a state decides this question under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, then what's to stop Texas from going haywire and taking Biden off? Because it might be that Texas it's kind of purple now. It might go Democrat. A lot of Californians are moving out there. All right, baby, Californians, that's where I'm from. We're moving out there and turning the state blue. You know, my friends in Arizona are saying, hey, what the hell, man? All you guys are moving out here, and there's still a bunch of Democrats out here now. I'm like, sorry, bro. I'm an independent voter. So, I'm going to vote one way or the other. I voted for Biden, but Biden's infirm and he's old. And I was speaking to a client of mine, and he was saying, yeah, as long as, Biden can just stand up and somebody else can sign his name, grab his hand and sign his signature, I'm fine with that. It's like, you're fine with a shadow handler? I mean, this is where we've come to as a country, where is half of the country's okay that our president is basically infirm. He's incompetent. He's so old. I mean, no offense, but I mean, look at him. He's old. And I'm not just talking about, age is just a number. Or you could be old and you could be Mick Jagger and you're old and you're still rocking and your cognitive abilities are still there and you're still up and know what's going on. And you can stay up and you can party and you can still have, not like a 20-year-old, but you can still go out and do stuff. Biden's like a veggie, I'm seeing. I mean, he's mumbling and he can't stay. He's falling asleep and he's falling. And yeah, Trump has his own problems. He's sexually assaulting women, and he's got a bunch of wives in the past, and he kind of says crass things, but you hear him talk, and at least he's talking straight. So, these are the choices that we have. But I think at the end of the day, the justices are going to come down unanimously and find that Trump is not disqualified. He was never charged with insurrection, nor was any individual who participated in January 6th, regardless of what people may think, regardless of how much it looked like an insurrection. An insurrection has to rise to a certain degree in order for it to be an insurrection, in my opinion. If you got like two guys out there with knives in front of the Congress, in front of the Capitol building going, we're taking over, that's just like two criminals. It's not an insurrection. You got to get enough people together, and they got to be armed to a significant degree in order to have a plausible ability to stop the processes of government. And there's no way that, Trump didn't call in the National Guard. Well, maybe he should have called it in to stop the thing that was going on, but he didn't call it in and be like, hey, you guys need to get behind me and get out your assault rifles, and we're going to go in there and tell Congress that they better make me president. That's definitely a coup. That's definitely insurrection. And as you get weaker to the point where the people who went in there didn't have guns, maybe some of them tried to get in there with guns. I don't know. Maybe someone who had guns. I didn't know of anybody who died except for police officers who had heart attacks, and the lady, one Ashley Babbitt, who got shot because she was being an idiot and going into the Capitol. I mean, people are idiots. They do stupid stuff. Does that make it an insurrection? Maybe. I don't know. And it might have been an insurrection, but then again, how much did Trump participate in that? He has plausible deniability. He says, well, I told him to, call it off. But whatever our opinions are, the question is should he be off the ballot? And that's what the justices are deciding. Did he have due process? Does Section 3 apply to the president? Who has the power to find a disability under Section 3? It's probably not the states, because the states were what Section 3 was trying to take power away from, saying the insurrectionists from the South, you can't be holding civil office anymore. You can't be a Congress or a senator, a congressperson or a representative or senator, I'd say. So those disabilities, that disability is probably a federal one. And that's just the way that it is. I mean, I don't know what the opinions are going to turn out to be. I don't know when we're going to find out, hopefully soon. And then we'll get this all straightened out. But anyway, I came back on to do a live stream, and I did my live stream for today. I'm going to be back tomorrow, hopefully a little earlier, because today I had court and I had a huge, massive set of discovery that I had to complete by today to get to the defendants who don't want to pay my client. And that's a whole nother story. I'm going to head out. See you all tomorrow, and have a good evening.